"Whose scarf is this?" Chloe asked, lifting it from the sofa with a look of disbelief. Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she was putting the final touches on a news story. The scarf was red with a pattern she didn't recognize. She frowned. "It's not mine," she replied, taking it in her hands. Chloe watched her closely, her expression shifting to concern. "Are you sure? Because, well, it was right here. And this isn't your style at all." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't the first strange thing to happen in recent weeks. First, the unfamiliar floral fragrance in the bedroom, then a wine glass with lipstick stains in the dishwasher. Now this. "Maybe one of Ethan's friends left it by mistake," she said, trying to sound casual, but Chloe didn't look convinced. "Sarah, things aren't by mistake in this house. Everything always has its place." Her cousin's comment echoed in her mind for hours after Chloe left. Sarah struggled to focus on her work, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture she didn't like. That evening, when Ethan got home, she watched him more carefully than usual. He seemed relaxed, even affectionate, but something about his behavior felt off. Sarah didn't mention the scarf. Instead, she listened to his every word, analyzing his every gesture. "How was your day?" Ethan asked as he poured 2 glasses of wine. "Busy as always." "And yours? How's that new project coming along?" she replied with a measured smile. Ethan began talking about his designs and meetings, but his answers were vague, as if he were narrating a generic story. Sarah noticed how he avoided her gaze whenever she asked specific questions. That night, as Ethan slept soundly beside her, Sarah checked his phone, something she had never done before. Guilt washed over her, but her gut feeling was stronger. However, she found nothing suspicious. The phone was clean, almost too clean. The next morning, Chloe stopped by again. "So, did you talk to him?" she asked as they made coffee in the kitchen. "I want to be completely sure before I do anything," Sarah replied, feeling the weight of her own words. Chloe nodded slowly. "If something is going on, you'll find out. But Sarah, don't ignore the signs." That same afternoon, while Ethan was at work, Sarah discreetly installed cameras in the main areas of their Chicago condo. It was an extreme measure, but the uncertainty was eating her up inside. If there was something to discover, she wouldn't remain in the dark. The following days were a mix of anxiety and waiting. Sarah reviewed the recordings each night, looking for something, anything. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. Ethan left for work early, came back late, and spent his evenings as if nothing were different. But on the 4th day, everything changed. On the footage, Sarah saw Ethan walk into the house, accompanied by a young, elegant, and self-assured woman. The woman slipped off her heels in the living room, dropped her purse on the sofa, and walked into the master bedroom as if she owned the place. Sarah felt her world crumble. She paused the video, her hands trembling. She rewound it to make sure she hadn't seen wrong, but there it was, a strange woman in her home, her space. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the woman try on her perfume and wear her silk robe. It was an invasion, an insult, and Ethan was there, laughing with her, completely carefree. Sarah slammed her laptop shut, unable to watch anymore. Her breathing was ragged, but she knew this was just the beginning. Now she had proof. Now she had a truth to face. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the images of Ethan and the woman invading her space came rushing back. She got up before dawn, unable to stay still, and watched the recordings again. Every second confirmed what she already knew. She was being betrayed, and it had been done with an impunity that filled her with rage. Mid-morning, Chloe arrived. Sarah had called her as soon as the sun rose, asking her to come over. Chloe entered with a worried look, but as soon as she saw Sarah's expression, she knew something terrible had happened. "I saw everything, Chloe." "Everything," Sarah said, pointing to her laptop on the dining table. "What did you see?" Chloe asked, sitting down quickly. Sarah opened the video, fast-forwarding to the moment Ethan entered with the woman. Chloe's face transformed from disbelief to outrage. "Is that woman using your things?" she asked, her voice filled with fury. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. "My robe, my perfume, even the jewelry that belonged to my mom." Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to contain her own anger. "This can't stand, Sarah, but you need to be smart. If you confront Ethan now, he'll deny everything." "I can't just sit back and do nothing," Sarah replied, slamming her open hand on the table. "You won't. But we have to think this through. You need to understand the whole situation before you act." Chloe was right. Sarah knew that what she had seen wasn't enough. She had to find out who this woman was and what else might be going on. That afternoon, while Ethan was at work, Sarah used her contacts at the newspaper to do some digging. With the little information she could gather from the recordings, she soon had a name: Isabella. She worked with Ethan at his architecture firm. She was an administrative assistant, but her reputation at the office was questionable. However, what caught Sarah's attention most was another piece of information. Isabella was linked to a fraud investigation involving a recent project at the firm. Apparently, large sums of money had disappeared from the budgets, and although no charges had been filed, Isabella was on the list of suspects. That night, Sarah confronted her own despair in the mirror. Ethan's betrayal was devastating, but now the situation seemed much bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just about infidelity, something darker was happening, and her journalist's instinct told her she had to get to the bottom of it. For the first time in days, Sarah didn't review the recordings. Instead, she sat down at her computer, took out a notebook, and started writing. She jotted down not only the details of what she knew but also her emotions, the humiliation, the rage, and above all, the determination. The next morning, she met with Chloe again. This time, she had a plan. "I'm going to keep investigating, but this isn't just about Ethan and that woman anymore. I want to know what's happening at his firm. If there's something illegal, I'm going to expose it." Chloe looked at her with admiration but also with concern. "Are you sure you want to mix this with your professional life?" Sarah held her cousin's gaze. "It is my life, Chloe, and Ethan decided to drag me into this. I'm not going to stay silent." The next few hours were filled with calls and emails to key contacts. Sarah began to piece together a puzzle that revealed details not only about Ethan and Isabella, but also about the financial irregularities at the firm. The further she dug, the clearer the picture of betrayal became, and the stronger her resolve to act grew. By the time Ethan came home that night, Sarah had a list of names, dates, and figures that didn't add up. She stored the information in a secure place, saying nothing. She just watched him with a tense calm that made him frown. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, leaning in to kiss her. Sarah pulled away slightly, feigning tiredness. "Yeah, just a lot of work." He didn't press, but Sarah noticed the tension in his movements. Something inside her told her that Ethan suspected something was changing. That night, while he slept, Sarah went back to the recordings. This time, she wasn't looking for confirmation of his infidelity. She was looking for clues, signs of something bigger. What she found was enough to reinforce her determination. Ethan and Isabella hadn't just betrayed her trust. They had done it with a boldness that demanded consequences. Now she knew it wasn't just about saving her broken marriage, but about protecting something more important, her dignity and her truth. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what she had discovered. Isabella wasn't just Ethan's mistress, but also a key player in a potential corruption scheme that could bring down the architecture firm. Every new piece of information she gathered fueled her indignation, but also her need to act cautiously. This was no longer just about her relationship. She was dealing with something much bigger. That morning, as Ethan had breakfast across from her, Sarah watched him closely, looking for any sign of nervousness. He, however, seemed relaxed, almost carefree, as he scrolled through his phone and drank his coffee. "What time do you have to leave today?" Ethan asked casually. "A little later." "I have a few meetings, but they won't be long," Sarah replied, measuring each word. He nodded without looking up. Sarah maintained her composure, but inside, she was seething. To think he could act as if everything were fine while living a double life made her more determined to expose him. As soon as he was out the door, Sarah got to work. With Chloe's help, she compiled all the information she had found so far: screenshots from the recordings, suspicious financial documents obtained through her contacts, and even some of Isabella's messages that were recovered thanks to software Sarah had installed on the home computer. "This isn't just about him and that woman anymore," Chloe said as they reviewed the information together. "What you're finding could have legal consequences." "I know, and that's what I want," Sarah replied coldly. Ethan decided to cross this line. Chloe nodded, though her face showed concern. Sarah decided it was time to confront Ethan, but she knew she couldn't do it impulsively. She had to be strategic, methodical, and above all, in complete control. She planned a confrontation that would not only back Ethan into a corner, but also allow her to face him in front of Isabella. Sarah's next step was to secure her plan with a call to one of her contacts at the newspaper. She wanted to ensure that if anything went wrong, the evidence she had wouldn't be buried. She sent a copy of everything she had gathered to a trusted editor with precise instructions. If anything happened to her, the material was to be published immediately. As evening approached, Sarah decided to make her first move. In a calculated gesture, she took one of the messages Isabella had sent to Ethan, filled with incriminating details about the diverted funds, and printed it. She then placed it in an envelope, which she left carefully on the dining table. When Ethan arrived home, he found the envelope and opened it curiously. As he read its contents, his expression changed from relaxed to tense in an instant. "What is this?" he asked, holding up the paper. Sarah watched him from the kitchen, where she was pretending to make tea. "I should be asking you that, don't you think?" she replied, her tone calm but sharp. Ethan placed the paper on the table, his face now a mixture of surprise and worry. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah came out of the kitchen and faced him directly. "About Isabella. About her work with you. And about everything you two have been doing behind my back." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't form a response. "Are you going to deny that you've been bringing that woman into this house?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms. Ethan took a step toward her, holding up his hands as if to calm her down. "Sarah, it's not what you think." "Oh, it isn't," she interrupted, pulling out her phone and playing one of the videos of him with Isabella. "Then what is this?" Ethan's expression hardened. For a moment, Sarah thought he might try to apologize or make an excuse, but instead, he changed tactics. "What did you expect, Sarah?" he finally said with a bitter tone. "You're always busy, always working. This house doesn't even feel like a home with you in it." Sarah felt a blow to her chest at his words, but didn't let her expression falter. "And that justifies what you've done? Justifies bringing another woman here, using my things, making a fool of me?" Ethan looked down, unable to answer. "This isn't over, Ethan. It hasn't even begun," Sarah said, turning to go to her room. That night, as she reviewed the evidence again, her phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "You've got him on the ropes. Make him tremble." Sarah closed her eyes, letting those words sink in. The next day, her plan would go into action. Sarah woke the next day with a cold clarity. She had spent the night planning every detail of what she would do. She would leave no room for doubt or escape for Ethan. The time had come to face him head-on, but this time she would do it with all the cards in her favor. The first call she made was to Isabella. In a calm voice, she introduced herself as Ethan's wife and asked to meet at their home that evening. "I think there are some things you and I should discuss," she said, measuring each word. The silence on the other end of the line was enough to confirm Isabella's discomfort. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally replied, though her tone betrayed her. "Of course you do. See you at 8 p.m. "And don't worry, Ethan will be there too," Sarah added before hanging up. Her next step was to ensure Ethan would be home at that time. She sent him a short, direct text. "We need to talk. I want you home early tonight." Sarah spent the rest of the day preparing her ground. She printed documents, organized the videos and photos she had gathered, and placed them in a folder she planned to use as evidence. Each page was a piece of the puzzle that would dismantle the facade Ethan had built. At 8 p.m. sharp, Sarah was sitting on the living room sofa, impeccably dressed, projecting the calm of someone in control. Ethan arrived first, his face etched with tension. "What is it now?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Sarah didn't answer, just looked at him steadily and gestured to the sofa opposite her. "Sit." He obeyed, though his body seemed poised to spring up at any moment. Before he could speak, The doorbell rang. Sarah stood up and opened it, letting Isabella in. The woman entered with hesitant steps, her gaze shifting between Sarah and Ethan. "What is this?" Isabella asked, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She walked back to the living room and took her seat, letting the silence fill the space. Finally, she picked up the folder she had prepared and dropped it onto the coffee table with a thud. "This," she said, looking at both of them, "is everything you've been hiding." Ethan and Isabella exchanged quick glances, but Sarah continued before they could interrupt. "I want you both to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I'm not here to scream at you or to give you the dramatic scene you're probably expecting. I'm here because I want you to understand that everything you've done has consequences, and those consequences start right now." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out the first few sheets. Screenshots of Isabella's messages to Ethan, filled with details about the diverted funds. "This," she said, handing them to Isabella, "is your signature on the documents confirming the financial irregularities. Or are you going to deny it?" Isabella took the papers with trembling hands. I was just following orders," she stammered, looking at Ethan as if for support. Sarah ignored her and turned to Ethan. "And you," she said coldly, "here is the proof that you've been using my home for your games, bringing her into my bed, into my life. You thought I wouldn't find out." Ethan tried to maintain his composure, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. "Sarah, please, it doesn't have to be like this. We can talk about this like adults." Sarah let out a short, bitter laugh. "Like adults? Is that what you were doing when you brought this woman here while I was at work? There's nothing to talk about, Ethan. The only thing left is for you both to accept what you've done and face the consequences." The atmosphere in the room was tense, almost suffocating. Isabella started to cry while Ethan clenched his fists, unable to find a way out. "Let me make something very clear," Sarah continued, standing up and taking her folder again. "I already have copies of all of this, in the hands of people who will make sure the truth comes out. If either of you tries anything against me, I won't hesitate to use every resource I have to ruin your lives." Isabella broke into a louder sob as Ethan stood up, trying to maintain a defiant posture. "You have no right to do this." Sarah took a step toward him, looking him directly in the eyes. "You took that right from me the day you decided to betray me. Now, you two will decide how you want this to end, the easy way or the hard way." Without waiting for a response, Sarah walked to the door and opened it, gesturing firmly. "Get out of my house." Isabella nearly ran out, not daring to look back. Ethan lingered for a moment, trying to find words, but Sarah gave him no chance. "You too. And don't even think about coming back." When the door closed behind him, Sarah was left alone in the living room with a silence that, for once, didn't feel heavy, but liberating. She had taken the first step. And though she knew there was still much to do, for the first time in weeks, she felt that control of her life was back in her hands. The morning after the confrontation, Sarah woke with a strange feeling, a mix of relief and emptiness. She had kicked Ethan out of her life, but she knew the battle wasn't over. What she had uncovered went beyond her marriage, and leaving it to fate was not an option. As she drank her coffee, her phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "So, how are you feeling?" "Relieved, but not satisfied." "This is just the beginning, Chloe. I can't rest knowing what I know." Chloe, ever practical, didn't try to dissuade her. "What do you need?" "Your support. I'm gathering everything to file a formal complaint, but first, I want to make sure every detail is solid. This can't fail." Sarah spent the day reviewing every piece of evidence. Documents, recordings, messages, everything was meticulously organized. However, as she dug deeper into the financial records of Ethan's firm, she found something she hadn't noticed before. Several transfers made to bank accounts linked to a shell company. The sum was exorbitant, much larger than she had imagined. This wasn't just infidelity or a minor case of fraud. Ethan and Isabella seemed to be involved in a money laundering scheme. That evening, Sarah contacted her trusted editor at the newspaper again. She explained the magnitude of the case and what she planned to do. Her editor, impressed, offered to publish a full investigative report with the newspaper's backing. "But be careful, Sarah," he warned. "If what you're saying is true, these people won't stop at anything. Sarah knew her editor was right, but she couldn't let fear paralyze her. That same night, she sent an anonymous email to the FBI, attaching the main pieces of evidence. If something happened to her, at least the authorities would have the information. The next day, Sarah went to Chloe's office to discuss the next steps. While they were talking, she received an unexpected text from Isabella. "I need to see you. It's important." Chloe raised an eyebrow when Sarah showed her the message. "What do you think she wants?" "I don't know, but if she's looking for redemption, maybe she has something else we can use." Sarah agreed to the meeting cautiously. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe downtown. When Isabella arrived, her face was pale, and her eyes reflected a fear she hadn't shown before. "Ethan is in trouble," Isabella began, speaking in a low voice. "The people he works with, they're not what they seem. This isn't just fraud, Sarah. There are dangerous people involved." Sarah leaned forward, her heart beating faster. "What are you talking about?" Isabella explained that Ethan had been collaborating with a group of developers who were using the firm to siphon funds from major public infrastructure projects. The names she mentioned were well known in the business and political worlds. "I just did what he told me to do. But when they started asking me to forge documents, I knew this was going to end badly," Isabella confessed, tears in her eyes. Sarah showed no compassion but knew this information was crucial. If what Isabella said was true, Ethan hadn't just destroyed their marriage, he was also putting many people at risk. "I need proof," Sarah said. "I have it," Isabella replied. "But if I give it to you, you have to promise you won't get me involved." "I can't promise you anything," Sarah said coldly. "But if you cooperate, it will be better for you than staying silent." Isabella, resigned, handed her a USB drive containing documents that confirmed everything she had said. Sarah wasted no time. That night, she reviewed every file, and what she found was even more devastating than what Isabella had described. There were fake contracts, illegal transfers, and emails implicating high-profile figures. Sarah knew then that she was playing with fire. This wasn't just a personal problem anymore. It had become a case that could shake the foundations of many institutions. That night, she received a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging where you shouldn't, or you'll regret it." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She wasn't going to stop. The next morning, she sent the evidence to the newspaper and the authorities, making sure nothing was left hidden. The storm was about to break, and Sarah was ready to face it, no matter the consequences. The impact of the information Sarah sent was felt almost immediately. Barely 2 days passed before the story began to circulate in major media outlets. The newspaper where Sarah worked published an extensive report on the corruption scheme, naming Ethan's architecture firm as the hub of the operation. Although the names of the most powerful figures were initially omitted, the message was clear: the truth was starting to come out. Sarah watched the news from her living room, her phone ringing constantly with calls from journalists and messages from acquaintances. She didn't answer any of them. Only Chloe had direct access to her, and that afternoon she arrived at her apartment with coffee and her usual expression, a mix of support and concern. "This is blowing up, Sarah. Are you ready for what's coming?" she asked, setting the mugs on the table. Sarah sighed, but her eyes were filled with determination. "You're never completely ready, but this had to be done. Ethan can't get away with this, nor can the people behind him." Chloe nodded but couldn't help but wonder if Sarah was aware of how dangerous the situation had become. That same evening, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Ethan. "What did you do?" His voice was a whisper laced with rage. Sarah remained calm. "What had to be done? Are you surprised that I finally decided to expose your lies?" There was a silence on the line, broken only by Ethan's heavy breathing. "You don't understand who you're messing with. This isn't a game, Sarah. If you keep this up, someone is going to get hurt. Someone already got hurt, and it was me. Now, Ethan, the rest is up to you." She hung up before he could reply. The threat in his voice was clear, but Sarah had no intention of stopping. She knew Ethan was cornered, and a desperate man was dangerous, but she also knew she had taken all the necessary precautions. The next day, the storm intensified. News reports began linking the case to multi-million-dollar public works projects in Chicago. pointing to irregularities that implicated high-ranking city officials. The scandal was no longer just local. It had caught the attention of national and international auditors. In the afternoon, Sarah received an anonymous email with a series of additional documents. She didn't know who sent them, but upon reviewing them, she confirmed they were even more damning evidence. Among the documents were bank transfers that directly connected Ethan to a senior government official. Chloe arrived shortly after, bringing food that Sarah forgot to eat as she analyzed the new files. "Who sent you this?" Chloe asked, surprised by the amount of information. "I don't know, but whoever it is wants this to come to light as much as I do. And you're not worried they might be using you?" Chloe looked at her seriously. Sarah paused, aware that her cousin was right. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. In the end, the truth is the truth." That night, the newspaper published a second part of the report, including the new documents. The response was immediate. Protests in the streets, interviews on television, and even a statement from the mayor's office promising a full investigation. But as things moved on a public level, Sarah knew she was in danger. She had noticed a black sedan parked near her building several times during the day, and when she went to the store, she felt someone following her. She called Chloe immediately. "I think they're watching me." Chloe didn't waste a moment. "Come to my place tonight." "You can't stay alone." Sarah packed the essentials and left without looking back. She spent the night at Chloe's apartment, surrounded by her cousin's warmth, but with her mind completely focused on what was to come. As they shared a glass of wine in silence, Sarah broke the quiet. "I'm not stopping, Chloe. I know this is dangerous, but if I don't do something, they'll keep winning." Chloe nodded, though her eyes reflected fear for her cousin. "I know. But promise me you'll be careful. I don't want anything to happen to you." Sarah smiled gratefully. "I promise." That night, as the world outside kept turning, Sarah reviewed the documents one last time. She knew the final blow was near, and she was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The following days were a whirlwind. The publication of the second report triggered a chain reaction. Political and business figures began to be investigated, and the scandal dominated headlines across the country. Ethan and his firm became the public face of corruption, but Sarah knew they were just one part of the machine. While authorities initiated formal proceedings, Sarah continued to receive anonymous tips with more information. She now had a broader picture: the shell companies, the connections with politicians and international firms, and the methods used to divert funds. It was a complicated puzzle, but Sarah understood it better than anyone. From her temporary refuge at Chloe's apartment, Sarah turned a corner of the space into her command center. Maps, notes, and documents covered the walls. Chloe watched her work with a mix of admiration and concern. "This never ends, does it?" she asked one afternoon, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Not until everything is on the table." "But we're close," Sarah replied, glancing over a file she had just received. One night, while reviewing an email full of illegal transfers, she received an unexpected call. It was Isabella. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," Isabella said, her voice trembling. Sarah hesitated for a moment, remembering their last conversation. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I know you want to end this, and I have something you need. Please give me a chance." Sarah cautiously agreed and arranged to meet Isabella in a busy park. Chloe insisted on accompanying her, staying at a safe distance, ready to intervene if something went wrong. When Isabella arrived, she looked different. She seemed worn out, as if the weight of her decisions had finally caught up with her. "I can't keep running, Sarah. They're watching me too, and I don't know what to do anymore," she confessed. "Who?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer. "The people who work with Ethan. This is much bigger than I imagined. They control everything." Isabella handed her a manila envelope with documents. "Here is everything I have: forged contracts, lists of bank accounts, names of everyone involved. If you use this, you can bring them all down." Sarah took the envelope, instantly assessing the authenticity of the papers. She said nothing for a moment, observing Isabella carefully. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because I can't take it anymore. I was wrong to follow Ethan, and I'm paying the price. But if I can help stop this, Maybe I can find some peace. Sarah nodded, putting the documents in her bag. This doesn't absolve you of responsibility, but you're doing the right thing. Isabella looked down, clearly aware of her own guilt. That night, Sarah and Chloe returned to the apartment with the envelope. They spent hours reviewing every paper, every number. The pieces fit together perfectly, and the corruption scheme was now crystal clear. Ethan hadn't just facilitated the fraud, he was one of the key leaders. Dawn found Sarah writing a new article, the most important of her career. She knew this would place Ethan at the center of a legal firestorm but would also implicate even more powerful figures. Before sending the article to her editor, Sarah looked at Chloe, who had stayed up with her all night. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Chloe asked, her voice tired but firm. Sarah nodded. "I can't stop now. This is bigger than me. Or Ethan." She hit the send button. The article was in the hands of the newspaper, and with it, the fate of Ethan and those around him. 2 days later, the article was published. The names of politicians, businessmen, and public figures resonated in all media. The authorities began raids and arrests. Ethan was arrested that same night while trying to leave the country. Chloe celebrated with a bottle of wine, but Sarah barely managed to smile. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but that moment marked an important step toward the truth. "You did it, Sarah," Chloe said, raising her glass. Sarah raised hers in response, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's not over, but we're moving forward." That night, as Chicago slept, Sarah finally felt that something had changed. For the first time in a long time, the weight on her chest felt a little lighter. The impact of Sarah's article was immediate and devastating. The raids continued, and Ethan's arrest had put other accomplices on high alert. However, the authorities still faced obstacles. Some of the documents and bank accounts pointed to overseas companies, complicating the process. Meanwhile, Sarah remained vigilant. She knew that her public exposure as the author of the article had made her a target. Although the threats had decreased after the initial arrests, the fear lingered. One afternoon, as Sarah reviewed new data sent by an anonymous contact, Chloe burst into the living room, her face filled with concern. "I just spoke to one of my clients, Sarah. He said he saw someone asking about you near the cafe." Sarah put the papers down on the table. "Who?" "He doesn't know, but it looked like someone hired to watch you. I think you should stay here a while longer." Sarah nodded but knew that hiding wasn't enough. She decided to contact an acquaintance in the police department to request protection. That same evening, an officer came to Chloe's apartment to discuss security measures. "Miss Meyer, it's not just your personal life at risk anymore," the officer said. "The people you exposed in your article have resources and allies. You dismantled something big, but there are still loose ends." Sarah was not intimidated. "Then let's finish the job." That determination led her to do something she had avoided until now, directly contact one of the main names mentioned in the documents. Through a source, she managed to arrange a meeting with a former partner of Ethan's, someone who had been key to the operation but now seemed willing to talk. The meeting took place in a discreet hotel in downtown Chicago. Chloe insisted on accompanying her, though she stayed in the lobby while Sarah went up to the agreed-upon room. The man, an architect named David Chen, looked nervous but resolute. "I shouldn't be here," he said as soon as she walked in. "If they find out I'm talking to you, I won't get out of this." "You're already involved, David. Talking to me might be your only chance to fix something," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. David sighed and began to speak. What he revealed was the missing link. He explained how the transfers were made through banks and tax havens, and how several contracts were connected to politicians who used the projects to fund their campaigns. Ethan had been one of the main coordinators, but not the only one. "Why are you doing this now?" Sarah asked, assessing David's sincerity. "Because I don't want to carry this anymore. Ethan convinced me it was just business, but this has destroyed lives. If I can help expose the truth, maybe I can live with less guilt." David handed her a folder full of documents. "This is everything I have. Use it well." Sarah returned to Chloe's apartment with the evidence in hand. That night, they both sat down to review the documents, the names, the transactions, the dates. It was all there. It was bigger than they had imagined. The next morning, Sarah sent the information to the authorities and began writing one last article. This would be the final blow, the one that would not only finish dismantling the scheme, but also mark the end of the road for Ethan and his allies. As she wrote, she received a call from her editor. "Sarah, this is huge, but you need to know you're up against people who won't give up easily. I know, but if I don't do this, they win." The article was published that night, and the repercussions were immediate. More arrests, asset seizures, and massive protests on the streets of Chicago. Sarah knew she had endangered many powerful people, but she also knew she had done the right thing. That night, as she watched the news from the sofa, she received a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." Sarah deleted it without replying. She was no longer afraid. She had faced the worst and was ready for whatever came next. Sarah's final article unleashed a firestorm. The political and business figures mentioned in her investigation had no room to maneuver. The authorities, pressured by public opinion and international scrutiny, were forced to act swiftly and decisively. Within days, government offices were raided, accounts frozen, and more arrests were made. But as the country celebrated the downfall of such an extensive corruption network, Sarah felt the weight of danger upon her. She knew that loose ends could trigger retaliation. She had put her name and face on a battle that was not yet over. Chloe, always worried about Sarah's safety, insisted on maintaining constant vigilance. The officer overseeing Sarah's protection reinforced security measures, installing cameras around the apartment and ensuring she was never alone. One night, while watching the news, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Ethan, from jail. "What do you want?" Sarah asked coldly. "To talk to you, Sarah. One last time." Sarah hesitated but agreed. She decided to go with Chloe and a security officer to the facility where Ethan was being held. She knew this conversation could be key to closing the final chapter. In the visiting room, Ethan looked unrecognizable. His polished, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a defeated man, but his eyes still held a glimmer of the arrogance Sarah had grown to despise. "Why did you do it?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "Are you really asking me that? You betrayed everything: our life, our trust, and what you thought was moral. All I did was bring the truth to light." Ethan leaned forward, his hands trembling. "Sarah, I wasn't the only one. You know there are more people behind this, people who are still free. If you keep going, they'll silence you. They've already tried, and I'm still here. I'm not going to stop just because you ask me to." Ethan looked down, defeated. "Be careful, Sarah. I don't want you to end up like me." Sarah stood up, looking at him one last time. "I'm not like you. I never was." Back at the apartment, Sarah reflected on Ethan's words. She knew what he said was true. Some of those responsible were still at large, and the corruption network still had powerful allies. But she also knew she had done the right thing. She had broken the silence, and that was all that mattered. A few days later, Sarah received a message from one of her contacts at the newspaper. There was a new lead on one of the key figures who had not yet been captured. A businessman operating from abroad who, according to David's documents, was one of the scheme's main architects. Sarah knew that publishing this information would be the final blow. She gathered all the material she had and sent it to her editor. That night, the article went live, making headlines around the world. The businessman was arrested within hours, and with him, the network was completely dismantled. Sarah had won, but she knew her life would never be the same. That night, as she looked out the window of Chloe's apartment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She had faced her fears, she had faced the danger, and she had triumphed. "You did it, Sarah," Chloe said, entering the room with a glass of wine. "I didn't do it alone. This is something we did together." They both raised their glasses, toasting to the end of a chapter filled with betrayal and pain, but also with justice and redemption. 6 months have passed since Sarah's last article was published, the one that marked the end of a corruption network that had poisoned the city for years. The headlines no longer carry her name, but the repercussions of her work still resonate. Politicians, businessmen, and influential figures are facing trial. Some have been convicted, while others continue to fight to avoid prison, but for Sarah, the battle is over. On a sunny afternoon, Sarah walks through the streets of Austin, a city brimming with life and a vibrant culture. She had left Chicago weeks ago to find a new beginning. The intensity of what she had experienced had left her exhausted, and she needed time to rediscover herself. She decided to move to Austin, Texas, a city just as lively, but with a fresh air that offered her anonymity and the chance to start over. Chloe had helped her settle into her new apartment before returning to Chicago. Although she missed her, Sarah knew the distance was necessary. Her cousin had been her rock during the darkest times, but now it was time for her to stand on her own 2 feet. Sarah found a small cafe near her new home, a quiet place where she spent her mornings reading and writing. She had taken a break from journalism, dedicating herself to a personal project, a book about her experience. Not just about the corruption she exposed, but also about the lessons she learned, the losses she faced, and the strength she discovered within herself. One afternoon, while reviewing a chapter draft, she received a text on her phone. It was from Isabella. "Thank you for not letting this stay in silence. I hope you find peace in this new chapter." Sarah smiled. Although she never thought Isabella would be part of her closure, she recognized that they were both victims and perpetrators in a larger game. She didn't reply, but felt a kind of relief, knowing that even the people who were part of her pain had found their own way. Later, as she strolled through a farmer's market, a group of young women recognized her. One of them approached shyly. "You're Sarah Meyer, right? We read your articles in our journalism class. You're an inspiration to us." Sarah watched them for a moment, noticing the hope in their eyes. She nodded with a warm smile. "Thank you, but remember, change doesn't come from just one person. You have the power to make it happen too." The young women said goodbye, and Sarah continued on her way, feeling a renewed energy. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a reminder that the truth, however painful, has the power to transform. That night, from her balcony, Sarah watched the city lights, feeling a peace she had sought for so long. The chaos was behind her, but the scars remained. However, those marks were not just memories of pain, they were symbols of strength, of resilience, and of a rebirth. With a final sip of wine, she closed her laptop. Her book was almost finished, and with it, she felt she was closing the loop on the story that had changed her life. Sarah stood up and went inside her home. The city continued to beat outside, but in her heart, everything was calm. The storm had finally passed, and she had emerged stronger than ever.